expand your mind, and enrich your world. It's time for another outstanding podcast from ICRT.
Hello and welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. I'm Keith Manconi. Puppet theater has a long history in Taiwan. It started off humbly enough with performances played out on the top of trunks of traveling puppeteers. But it's moved on to bigger and bigger stages since then, making it to television and later the silver screen in the last 40 years. The popularity of the form is still going strong even now, although that popularity has stayed mostly confined to the island. But on today's Taiwan Talk, we'll be speaking with one American expat who says he wants to take this traditional art form to international audiences by marketing an English-language version overseas. Matt Smith has been composing music scores for the Jingguang Puppet Theater for years now as the managing director for Taiwan-based music production company Zoetrope Cultural Media. I spoke with him recently at ICRT. Here's our conversation. Matt, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
But before we get to the work that you're going to be doing specifically, I was wondering if you could introduce quickly the company that you work with, Jingguang Puppet Theater. The man that's heading this theater, he's part of a puppeteering family in Taiwan, but he's done a lot of things to update the form. So could you talk a little bit about that, the ways that he's updated it?
Oh, yeah. Well, Stephen Huang, he's the son of Huang Junxiong, who is pretty much a household name in Taiwan. He is responsible for taking puppet theater from the traditional traveling puppet troupe from village to village format to the television format that it is currently airing in today. He created a puppet show that was massively popular in Taiwan, had huge following, and has now transitioned to his son, Stephen, who has updated a lot using modern-day CGI effects. He's using modern musical scoring techniques. Also, the story is a lot more fast-paced and youthful, a lot more action involved. The choreography of the action is also much improved. So he's done a lot to kind of improve on the show and on this formatting.
So if somebody were to watch this now, they'd probably see something along the lines of two long-haired guys with big swords and lots of like fireball-type looking things flying in between them.
Yeah, you'll see some of that for sure. There's all sorts of weaponry, all sorts of different fighting styles, and a lot of mystical kung fu styling and things like that. So you'll get a bit of all of that.
So let's start with how you yourself got interested in this form. Now, not to impugn it in any way, but I think a lot of our foreign listeners that maybe aren't quite so steeped in it, on their first encounter, they might think to themselves, fighting puppets, how do I get into that? So how did you get into that?
To be perfectly honest, I had the same type of view of the show, of this art form when I first saw it. I remember when I came to Taiwan and flipped on the TV and wanted to see what kind of TV do they have in Taiwan. And I started channel surfing, and one of the things I came across was puppet theater. And I probably had the same reaction of a lot of expats and thinking, what on earth is this? What have I walked into here? I maintained that type of attitude towards it for a long time. We started up a musical company, my wife and I, doing musical scores for television shows and films here in Taiwan and in China as well. And my wife had the idea of working for Budaishi, puppet theater. And my initial response was somewhat standoffish. I had the same viewpoint of it as a lot of foreigners. And I was invited down by Stephen Huang to go see a live performance, not a televised performance, a live one that they were doing down in Kaohsiung. And I watched it there, and I was really blown away. Not only by the puppetry, but the voice acting and the storyline. They had subtitles going on at this live performance. They were Chinese subtitles, so I had to read those. But I figured out the plot for the most part, and I was enjoying it. And they had a lot of not computer special effects because this was a live performance, but they had a lot of explosions on stage and lighting and lasers and all sorts of stuff going on. And I was completely captivated by what I was seeing. I wanted to see more. I wanted to know what was going to happen to the characters next.
So now let's get in a little bit more to your project. So explain this to myself and our listeners. What is it exactly that you're planning to do?
What we're planning to do is take the show as it is right now, and we're going to translate it, put subtitles on it, and distribute it to Western audiences, anybody who is interested in watching budaishi, watching puppet theater.
So what is that going to entail? What do you think needs to happen to make it accessible to a foreign audience?
Well, the method that we're using right now, we've thought a lot about how we were going to get this done into an English format, and I'm overseeing a team of translators who are going through it, which is quite a hefty job. Traditional Taiwanese is not an easy thing to translate into English, so there's lots of poetry involved in puppet theater.
That's an important point. It's puppet theater is usually in Taiwanese, not even Mandarin.
That's right. It's almost exclusively in Taiwanese. So, so we're taking it from Taiwanese and translating it into English. After we do that, we have a writer in the U.S. who is helping to update the language a bit, make it nicer, more literary in style, so that it'll be more accessible to foreign audiences.
So the basic plot, the basic who the characters are, their personality, all of that you're preserving.
Right. We don't want to make a show for Westerners. That's not what we're trying to do here. We want to keep what budaishi is here, keep the storylines, keep the things that have made it successful here in Taiwan, and just make it into English in a way that is accessible for foreigners.
Now, continuing that thought that you were having right there, one of the things that catches my eye about this project is it seems like it's almost a continuation of this long process that puppet theater has undergone in Taiwan in a certain way, just in the sense that over the last 100 years, it's gone from this relatively traditional form that had somewhat more formal rules to it and more formal ideas about what it should be, and over the last 100 years, especially over the last 50 years, it's become something that you can do on television. It's become something that can be a lot of different things and mean a lot of different things to different people. And so how do you think about that in terms of what parts of this you're going to try to preserve and what parts of this you're going to, kind of make your own and make more available to an audience that might not be as steeped in Taiwanese culture?
Well, the things that we are trying to preserve, we're trying to preserve references to Eastern culture, to mysticism and kung fu, and things that appeal to a lot of foreigners. On the other hand, there's certain references that people won't understand. And of course, we'll have to change that. And we'll have to adapt the script to that to make it something that foreigners will immediately be able to not only be interested in because it is Eastern culture, but they'll be able to understand and won't be confused by it.
What kind of references would be more confusing?
There's definitely sometimes in puppet theater where they will talk about maybe obscure Chinese historical references, something that, foreigners just won't grasp right away. So we're going to have to, find a way of either making a different reference to something that foreigners will understand or to just eliminate that reference completely and change the script a little bit, So, there's a lot of tweaks and things that need to be done to make it readily accessible.
Now, a number of years ago, there was another attempt to bring Taiwanese puppet theater to foreign audiences. Somebody tried to do that on Cartoon Network, but they weren't quite so successful. So what would you say that you're trying to do a little bit differently?
Not to get too much into discussion of competitors, but in that specific instance, I know that they completely reshot the show, they completely redid the script, and they made it specifically for a Western audience. And that's not the direction we'd like to take with it. We want to take what has already been successful here, we want to translate it into English. We'll have to do a little bit of tweaking on it, but we don't want to change the story structure. We don't want to change the culture of the show. We don't want to completely redo this. We want to take what we have and offer it to Western audiences.
Now, of course, there are a couple of things that are going to be a little bit more difficult to preserve. I'm curious specifically about one of the aspects of puppet theater in Taiwan is that it's usually performed by one person, and one person is going to perform every single role. Are you going to try to maintain that?
Well, in our initial project here, we're just working on subtitles. So, I mean, we're not going to be changing that at all. And yes, it is true that it's been tradition in Taiwanese puppet theater for one primary performer to act all of the voice roles, and they still maintain that tradition today. So Stephen Huang, who is the head of Jingguang Puppet Theater, he is the voice performer, and he does the voices for all characters, and we're talking dozens and dozens, probably hundreds of characters here in this show, and they range from old to young to male to female, all sorts of characters. So it's quite a big undertaking for one performer to do. Eventually, when we move on to doing voiceover work in English, which is not something we're doing initially, but we do hope to eventually get there, we probably won't be able to maintain that part of the tradition. We'll probably get several voice actors to do all the varied parts. I don't think that's something that necessarily would transition well into an English version of the show. So.
Now, another element that I think, at least in Taiwan, is really important in these shows is their use of language, their use of Taiwanese. I don't speak any Taiwanese, but just from my reading, it does seem like that one of the reasons that people connect with these shows is because how much personality they can get out of their use of specifically the Taiwanese language. Is there any way for you to preserve any of that use of language or give that sense of how language is being used when you translate this?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true that Taiwanese, the language, plays an extremely important and critical role in the show. I mean, a lot of audiences around Taiwan, they watch it specifically for the use of the language. Of course, it's impossible to completely grasp all of the specifics, the details, the intricacies of the Taiwanese language as we do a translation. We do the best we can. But I think instead of, grasping the beauty of the Taiwanese language, I think what we're trying to do in our transition to English is just to at least grasp the beauty of language itself. So there's a lot of times where poetry is used within the puppet theater shows. We're going to try and make the language of the English also poetic in those places. A lot of times when a certain character takes the stage in a puppet theater show, they'll have a short little poem or phrase that kind of marks their arrival on set. So we're going to try and capture that. We're going to try and give them each one of these little poetic sayings of their own. We're trying to capture as much of that beauty as we can. Of course, it's not Taiwanese, but it is a beautiful language is what we're trying to grasp.
Now, you're probably going to have to explain this a little bit to me, but this is a very established storyline that you're going to be undertaking, I understand. How far back does this go?
I mean, for example, Jingguang Puppet Theater, their two primary characters are, I would say, probably Master Su, whose name in Chinese is Shi Yanwen, and then Mirror Man, who's Cang Jingren. These two characters have been part of Taiwanese puppet theater culture for probably 100 years. Stephen Huang, who is the managing director and the CEO of Jingguang Puppet Theater, his grandfather, Huang Haidai, was the originator of these characters. So that was a long time ago, and that was back in the days of traveling puppet troupes going from village to village at the temples doing performances. He then passed these characters on to his son, Huang Junxiong, who was Stephen's father. And then Huang Junxiong was the one that was responsible for kind of making the transition onto television, taking puppet theater from these traveling troupes and actually making it a televised art form. When he did that, people all across Taiwan became very familiar with these two characters and the other characters of Jingguang Puppet Theater. So everyone, if you ask anybody over the age of 25, 30, they'll know who Shi Yanwen and Chang Jingren are. Everyone knows these characters. They're extremely critical to Taiwan culture. Everyone knows. At times, Shi Yanwen has been called one of Taiwan's greatest heroes. I mean, he's extremely important character in Taiwan mythology. So,
so how do you bring people that aren't necessarily so familiar with this and aren't steeped in this in on that storyline?
Yeah, that's the tricky part, because we're basically trying to jump in the middle of a story that's been going on for decades and decades. Is there a perfect way of doing that? Not really. There's not really a perfect way of doing it. So we're just doing the best we can. We found a series that maybe will make a very good starting off point for foreigners. As we are writing the English script, we're doing the translation, but we're also trying to insert backstory, and so that people will have some idea of what's gone before. They'll have some idea of the relationship between these two characters, and they're not the only two characters. There's dozens of characters that have had storylines going on for a long time. So it's definitely a large undertaking, and it's something that's a little tricky. But I think we're doing a good job of making it so that people will be able to get acclimated and be able to, jump in.
And so that kind of leads to another question. When you think about how people are going to view this, do you think that they're going to view this as a cool show with a cool storyline, or do you think that they're going to view it as a Taiwanese show and a representation of Taiwanese culture, and that's going to be what's going to interest them?
Well, I think expats in Taiwan might view it as a Taiwanese show, because it's something that they've already had some amount of, they've seen reruns, old reruns on TV sometimes, so they view it as a Taiwanese thing. But as we push out to more general foreign audiences, to Western audiences, I'm hopeful that they'll see it for, just being wow, this looks interesting. It looks different than anything I've ever seen before. It's got lots of cool action. The storylines are great, and I'm hoping that they'll get involved because of that, and because maybe I know there's a lot of people that are interested in Far Eastern culture, and I think that this might be able to be something that might attract them.
Now, switching gears pretty significantly, the original way that you got involved in this is through your music production company, Zoetrope Cultural Media, and so you were basically composing music for this puppet theater. So can you tell us a little bit about the difference between, you've composed for like TV and movies. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the process of composing for a puppet show, one of these traditional puppet shows, or composing for something that we'd be more familiar with, like film?
There's actually a very big difference between the composing for puppet theater and composing for traditional television shows or movies. And primarily because the production process for TV shows, normal TV shows and movies, compared to puppet theater is completely opposite. When we compose for television shows or movies, usually we're given a finished, edited, shot version of the show. Right. And then we see it with no music, and we write music to what we see. Right? We see someone falling in love, we write music for them falling in love. We see certain actions on screen, we write music that accompanies those actions. Where puppet theater is done the opposite way. First, they do the sound, then they do images. So when they're producing a puppet theater show, the voice actor, Stephen Huang, he records all of the audio first. He records all of the lines. He does all the voice acting right from the beginning. He edits in the music, and then they take that and they film the puppet actions to the audio that exists already.
So they're fitting their the visuals to the audio, whereas usually it's you fit the audio to the visuals.
Exactly. It's completely the opposite.
And how do you feel that affects the way that you work?
Well, it definitely makes a big difference, because when you see something happen on screen and you're writing to that, you've got some certain rules that you got to play by. You've got to get timing down right. You've got to make sure that you fit every little change in emotion that happens on screen. You've got to fit that into your music. But when you're writing the music first, you have a little bit more freedom. You've got a little bit more playroom. You can take your time with certain emotions. You can, you write the music the way that you visualize it. Sometimes when I'm writing music for puppet theater, I have to first come up with the idea of a scene in my mind. I mean, it might not be what it's eventually used for, right? My music might actually be used for a completely different type of scene. But when I'm composing, I sometimes have to think of, okay, let's imagine this is happening, that is happening, and then suddenly this happens. What kind of transition in the musical sound will I have there? And I compose to that. And then after we write the music, we give it to Steven, and he'll listen to the music, and then he'll put it to parts of the show where he thinks it fits emotionally. And sometimes he's even told us that the music that we write shapes his idea of what the show is going to become. Maybe he'll have a certain idea for a scene, but when he hears a certain piece of music, he goes, ooh, maybe I should change the scene here because I think that would fit this song even better. So it's a little bit different.
Now, I think that somebody who's not necessarily familiar with these shows might not know is that, there's a huge quantity of work that's coming out. There's many, many episodes that are coming out throughout the year, and they don't repeat the music too much. Like you're hearing also a vast quantity of music that's coming out. Is that right?
That's right. We produce, for every maybe 30 episode arc that they do, we produce at least 60 new pieces of music that all average maybe 4 minutes in length. All right, so we produce tons of music for this show. For those that are familiar with anime, those of the audience that are familiar with anime, I know that when you watch anime, you'll often hear the same love song appear over and over and over. Like they reuse it. But in puppet theater, some things are reused, but not to the frequency of an anime. I mean, they've got such a vast amount of music that they use in the show. And the fans of the show really love the music. It's something that they collect. They always want to get the latest album, the latest soundtrack, so that they can go back and listen to their favorite characters' songs. So it's something that's really integral to the show.
So speaking of that album, you actually released one of those real soon. Can you tell us about the latest album that you released?
Yeah, on the 21st, just not too long ago, the 21st of January, we released our latest album. It's available. All of our albums are available at Family Mart. They've got the Family Port little computer screen. You go on there and you can order our albums there and pick them up at the store. So we release frequent albums, and you can also pick up the show there. Episodes are released every Wednesday at 5 o'clock, and you can just go up to the counter and say, I want the puppet show, and they'll hand it to you.
So anybody who wants to get a toehold in this art form, that's the place to do it.
That's the place to do it, but I will warn you, if you can't read Chinese, you'll have a difficult time, unless you're very good in Taiwanese.
And as soon as you get that subtitled version out and eventually that dubbed version out, you're going to let us know?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
All right, perfect. Well, Matt Smith is the managing director of Zoetrope Cultural Media. Matt Smith, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Taiwan Talk. As always, we'd love to hear what you thought of today's program. You can leave us a comment on our Facebook page or rate and review Taiwan Talk on iTunes. You can also leave a comment on the ICRT blog, where we've posted a few links to articles about puppet theater in Taiwan. For ICRT, I'm Keith Manconi.